Part 5. Pickett's Attack to Emmitsburg Road. See this animation, which shows the morning movements of the 3 brigades from Pickett's division, and they're highlighted in red, on July 3. They spent the night of the 2nd camped near Marsh Creek, and then at dawn on the 3rd were up and moving toward the Confederate line on Seminary Ridge. And this map shows them stopping for a few minutes, just on the west side of Seminary Ridge, probably while there was a discussion on where each brigade would deploy. And then they moved forward to positions near the Spangler Farm, about 9 a.m. On this map, the gray rectangles are Confederate infantry brigades and blue are Union infantry brigades. The Confederate position is to the west on Seminary Ridge. The Union position is to the east on Cemetery Hill here and Cemetery Ridge. The town of Gettysburg is to the north. To get a feel for distances on this map, the distance from the Union to the Confederate lines right here is about 3/4 of a mile. And also, by way of getting the lay of the land, see this org chart for the Confederate Army. Notice the line of command. General Lee's in overall command, and he delegated command of this charge to one of his 3 corps commanders, General Longstreet. The right wing of the attack was Pickett's division, 3 brigades. All the regiments in these brigades were from Virginia, and the brigades are highlighted in red. Simple so far: Lee, Longstreet, Pickett. But notice those other 2 brigades. They're from Hill's Corps. And those 2 brigades were intended to provide cover on the south flank to Pickett's 3 brigades, which were the spearhead for the right wing. And it's commonly written that Generals Hill and Longstreet were barely on speaking terms. The lines of command here seem a bit tangled, and you'll see how this works out. Wilcox's and Lang's brigades were ordered forward to protect Longstreet's artillery, and see Wilcox's and Lang's brigades here. Kemper's brigade will pass through their line at the start of the advance. At the end of the bombardment, General Pickett got Longstreet's okay to attack, and apparently Pickett rode to each of his 3 brigade commanders to give them the word to go forward. There are at least 2 different versions of what General Pickett said to General Garnett. One appears in Earl Hess's book, Pickett's Charge, and the second version, which sounds more real to my ears, recorded in an August 16, 2023 post by Tom Elmore on Civil War Talk. And Mr. Elmore quotes Major Berkeley of the 8th Virginia this way: "My brothers were near General Garnett when Pickett came up and spoke to him before we went into the charge. And he said, 'Dick, old fellow, I have no orders to give you, but I advise you to get across those fields as quick as you can, for in my opinion, you're going to catch hell.'" Unquote. The men were ordered to put blankets and knapsacks in company piles, load weapons and fix bayonets, and do not fire until they reached Union lines. One of Pickett's staff members, Captain Robert Bright, informed the brigade commanders that all officers were to advance on foot. General Garnett had an ankle injury, so Garnett rode. General Kemper ignored the order, and General Kemper also rode. Garnett and Kemper's brigades were the front line. General Armistead, leading his brigade in the supporting line, went forward on foot. According to this map, just before 3 p.m., they edged up closer to the artillery line, and then at 3 p.m., they started forward. In Part 2, the video covering the bombardment, I described how Pickett met with Longstreet and got the okay to attack. Pickett then rode off to check in with his 3 brigades, as I just described, and Longstreet rode over to the artillery lines to check in with Colonel Alexander, who was commanding the artillery. To visualize this, understand that the infantry is deployed just behind Seminary Ridge, and that the artillery line was forward on the ridgetop or just past it. So when Pickett ordered the infantry to advance, they would climb up the backside of the ridge, over the top, through the artillery line, and then downhill and across the valley toward Emmitsburg Road. So as Longstreet starts his conversation with Colonel Alexander, Pickett's infantry is probably starting to move forward. Longstreet asked for Alexander's report and latest observations. and Longstreet learned then that the ammunition chests were empty, that the ordnance train, which held their remaining supply of ammunition, had disappeared, and that the guns they intended to run forward to support Pickett's infantry during the attack had also disappeared. And Stephen Sears wrote in his book, Gettysburg, that all this was enough to rouse Longstreet to one last attempt to stifle the attack, unquote. Remember from Part 2 that Longstreet, in his own after-battle report, said he did not believe the attack could be successful. At this point, Longstreet ordered Alexander to go to General Pickett, stop the attack, and then refill his ammunition. Colonel Alexander explained that if they paused, it would just give the Union gunners time to reinforce their positions and refill their ammunition chests. So they were stuck. And as Sears describes it, before Longstreet could respond, Pickett's division marched past them, through the artillery line and out onto the meadow towards Emmitsburg Road. How long did the attack take? Earl Hess in his book said that it took the infantry 15 to 20 minutes to reach Emmitsburg Road, which implies maybe another 15 minutes to reach Cemetery Ridge. On the other hand, Earl Hess also quotes a private in one of Pickett's units timing the advance from departure to reaching the Union lines at precisely 19 minutes. So you pick a number, somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes to reach the Union lines. My map has it on the quick side at just over 20 minutes. Let me stop here to make more clear a problem that I mentioned earlier. Here's a map showing 3 p.m. positions and lines from Fry's and Kemper's brigades to the angle. And see the difference. I'm using Fry to represent the path Pettigrew's division followed, and Kemper to represent the path Pickett's division followed. And it looks to me like Kemper's brigade had to travel just as far from south to north as they did straight ahead to the east. There was a 400-yard gap between Pettigrew's and Pickett's divisions. It was the job of Pickett's division to close that gap. Pickett's troops couldn't just attack straight ahead. Pettigrew's division would attack straight ahead. Pickett's division would have to slide to the north while facing east. If they turned their line to face north, which is the direction they're moving, they would expose their flank to the main Union line. And of course, if you know this story, the right flank was going to be exposed anyway. Pickett's division had a tough job. How many men started the attack? Philip Lano in his book, Gettysburg Campaign Atlas, gave the totals as 5,031 for the right wing, Pickett's division, and 6,840 for the Pettigrew-Trimble wing on the left. And that's a total of 11,871 on the attacking side. Opposing them were 5 brigades of Federal infantry, and according to Stephen Sears, they totaled 5,280. So the Confederates were attacking with an advantage of about 2 1/4 to 1. The Federal troops are occupying high ground behind a stone wall, with artillery support alongside and behind them, and importantly, lots of reinforcements close by. The 2 wings, Pettigrew and Trimble on the left, Pickett on the right, started at about the same time. The Cadore Barn was the initial aiming point for Pickett's division. The first hostile shots probably came from Lieutenant Rittenhouse's battery on Little Round Top, which had 6 cannons. And Stephen Sears described Rittenhouse's spot as, from an artillerist's perspective, the best site on the battlefield, unquote. He had the range to hit all 3 of Pickett's brigades. And Sears quoted Lieutenant Rittenhouse, "I watched Pickett's men advance and opened on them with an oblique fire and ended with a terrible enfilading fire," unquote. As Pickett's infantry starts forward, look to the right and see this Union brigade placed in front of the main Union line. That's Stannard's brigade, and more about them later. When Pickett's advance started, they couldn't see the other wing of the attack, Pettigrew's and Trimble's divisions. Look at an elevation profile to see what was going on. This profile follows a line that runs north to south up the valley from opposite the peach orchard to the Bliss farm. And here's the elevation profile. Note the high ground right in the middle. Pickett's division started on the south side of the divide and worked their way north to join with Pettigrew's division. As long as Pickett's officers and men were on the south side of this rise, they couldn't see what was happening with Pettigrew's division. And here's the high ground on the map. And see the fence along here that runs across the valley. And apparently, General Longstreet sat on this fence and watched the attack. My guess is it was about here. From this spot, he could see both wings and across to the Federal lines. General Pickett apparently was riding back and forth between the peach orchard, which is high ground, and this high ground in the center of the valley, watching the progress of his 3 brigades. General Pickett saw problems developing with Pettigrew's left and sent 2 staff officers to try and rally Pettigrew's men. Earl Hess wrote that as the men on Armistead and Garnett's left flanks moved up onto the high ground between the 2 wings, they got a view of the northern part of the battlefield, and Hess quoted an officer in the 9th Virginia, one of Armistead's regiments. "I saw troops on our left in wild disorder rushing by to the rear," unquote. And General Pickett also saw problems with his 3 brigades. Kemper's brigade was taking the worst part of the shelling from Little Round Top. Armistead's brigade was Pickett's supporting line, and they began to pass disheartened soldiers from Garnett and Kemper's brigades, making their way to the rear. Pickett saw a gap between Garnett and Kemper and between Garnett and Pettigrew's division. It was Pickett's responsibility to guide on Fry's brigade in Pettigrew's division, so as I said before, it was up to Pickett's men to close that gap. His infantry were already dressing left, and dressing left means that each man was supposed to close up on the man to their left, which would pull the whole formation to the left, but it was not enough. It was about here, approaching Emmitsburg Road, that General Pickett ordered his brigades to oblique to the left. In other words, maintain a front facing the Union lines while sliding to the left as they advanced. Difficult to do under fire, right? Earl Hess in his book commented on the order to left oblique. Pickett's Virginians accomplished their tactical mission, but it was not easy, and it undoubtedly delayed the crossing of the valley and threw the regiments into more confusion than was necessary, unquote. As they got closer to Emmitsburg Road, McGilvery's artillery was uncovered, and they opened up. And when I say the artillery was uncovered as Pickett's division moved north, what I'm getting at is McGilvery's artillery was positioned on a line between the Hummelsbaugh and Wycoot farms, here. There was a small rise just to their west, so earlier, during the bombardment, they were invisible to Confederate gunners and received no counter battery fire. And as Pickett's division started moving north, the view of the infantry was blocked. But once Pickett's infantry moved north, McGilvery's guns were revealed. McGilvery's gunners saw the infantry spotted the artillery. And Stephen Sears described the moment. As Kemper's and Garnett's and Armistead's lines crested the rise, there was surely a moment of mutual surprise. 5,830 Confederate marchers abruptly confronting a massed array of cannon none of them had suspected was there, and McGilvery's gunners at last sighting the enemy's infantry, marching not toward them, but at an oblique angle past them, ideal for enfilade fire. To that point, they'd been fired on mostly from Rittenhouse's battery on Little Round Top, 6 guns. But Lieutenant Colonel McGilvery commanded a powerful gun line that had been carefully positioned to take any infantry assault against the Union center in enfilade, and McGilvery had 41 guns. Besides complicating things for Pickett's infantry, there were other consequences of the left oblique. Pickett's skirmishers didn't get the order to go left and continued straight ahead. And the same thing happened with Wilcox's and Lang's brigades. Wilcox and Lang's brigades were supposed to cover Pickett's right flank. They started late, and didn't expect Pickett to move north, and they attacked straight forward, rather than following Pickett to the left. More on that later. The oblique to the left alerted Union observers that the point of attack was to the north, and artillery reinforcements were rushed in that direction. Philip Lano documents one battery and part of another battery sent west from Cemetery Hill, and 2 more batteries brought up from the rear to reinforce Gibbon's and Hayes's position. Shaler's brigade and the 3rd Corps was also sent north to reinforce the infantry at the point of attack, and later you'll see Robinson's division from 1st Corps also moved to reinforce the line on Cemetery Ridge. General Gibbon commanded the division that held the line south of the angle. He rode along the line to talk to his men while they waited for the Confederate infantry to reach Emmitsburg Road. "Do not hurry, men, and fire too fast. Let them come up close before you fire, and then aim low and steadily." Unquote. About the same time that General Pickett sent 2 staffers to try to stiffen Pettigrew's line, which I mentioned earlier, he also sent a 3rd staff officer, Captain Robert Bright, back to Longstreet asking for help. Longstreet again was probably about here, and this is described in Hess's book, and I'll pass along a short version of the exchange with Longstreet. Longstreet was told that Pickett could take the Union position, but would need help to hold it. And Longstreet asked, where were the troops on Pickett's flank? And Longstreet was told to look to the north. Longstreet did that and saw Pettigrew's troops fleeing to the rear. So Longstreet then told Captain Bright to tell General Pickett the attack had been repulsed, that General Wilcox was in the peach orchard, and Pickett can order Wilcox to his assistance. So, before the attack reached Emmitsburg Road, Longstreet's judgment was that they'd already failed. Pickett quickly followed Longstreet's advice and called on Wilcox's and Lang's brigades for support. Garnett and Kemper reached Emmitsburg Road about the same time that Pettigrew's division did. Garnett crossed the road to the north of the Cadore farm, Kemper to the south. The advance to Emmitsburg Road was the easy part. From here forward, they would also come under concentrated fire from the Union infantry, plus the continuing artillery fire from McGilvery's and Rittenhouse's guns to the south, and add to that Osborne's guns to the north on Cemetery Hill, and Hazard's guns in their front on Cemetery Ridge.